All right. Well, welcome everyone to another episode of Monthly on Mondays. Today is February 12th, 2024. And on the docket for tonight is a discussion about recommendation letters and award letters. And so we have a panel with us tonight of Dr. Farid, Dr. Gall, and Dr. Kuppermann. And we have a set of questions we're going to be asking our panelists. And asking them for advice on how do they write letters, how do they decide what letters to turn down or not, are they using ChatGTP? There's all kinds of things we could discuss tonight. As usual, we're recording this and we'll be posting on the Associate Dean's website. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or actually just unmute yourself. It's a small enough group that we can do that. But if you want to unmute yourself, please feel free to do so. But let's start with Dr. Parekh.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you to our esteemed panelists. Thank you for taking time to join us. And I wanted to start out with the first question is, do you have a template that you use when writing recommendation letters? And I know a lot of faculty write letters for students, trainees, and faculty. They may be different things that you are looking at and what you include, and can you explain that to the group? Do I want to start with Dr. Gall?
I'm also happy to start.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, wonderful. First of all, I wanted to say thank you so much for having me, and I apologize that my camera is off. I'm actually last minute child pickup issues, so I'm driving and talking, so I hope that's okay with everyone. But I just want to kind of put out there that I think one of the key things that I try to remember when I'm writing these letters of recommendations is what my the recipient of that letter really needs to hear about this applicant. And I really feel that that's the critical part of making sure that that message is sent across, whether it's for residency applications, fellowship applications, or a job recommendation or whatever it is, but to really speak to the qualities that recipient is looking for and is important for them in terms of seeing who is appropriate for that position.
Okay, I'll pick up then. The question was whether there's a template, and I got to admit I have a template in my head, but I find it's easier. I write a lot of letters for students that are applying to, so I have undergraduates in the lab, students applying to medical school, graduate school, but also graduate students applying for postdoctoral positions or for jobs. And frankly, I open up an old letter for somebody that is in the same category, and I personalize it because there's certain sort of mechanical aspects. So the first paragraph always says, who am I? How did I come to know this person? How long have I known the person? And then I'll conclude with, I work closely with them. I could write a very informed letter. Sometimes I was just on their committee, so I could speak to their research productivity or something like that. So the very first paragraph is short and sort of places me into the context so they know who I am as a reviewer and sort of where to place my review. Then the guts of it will be, depending on how close I know them, it's 1 to 3 paragraphs, and that will be personally talking about the individual that I'm writing about. And as was just said, I'm highlighting things that are pertinent to the position that individual is applying for. But I do provide enough examples of sort of my impression of the person so they know I really know them. I don't want it to be a throwaway letter. So I want them to know I actually have some working experience with this individual, and that is on which I base my comments. And then I have, again, a short paragraph at the bottom. I might have some comments about personal characteristics. They work well as a team member, or they take initiative, and then sort of end with my level of enthusiasm. So that, in a sense, is a template because the beginning and ending paragraphs kind of have the same thing, and it's the center part that is personalized. If it's my graduate student and they're applying for an important position, I make sure it's not really short. I want them to know I'm taking my time enough to give them a real body of information. If I was just a committee member on their dissertation, I could be much more specific, and then it's shorter. But I don't want them to think I didn't bother to take 15 minutes if I sincerely want to recommend the person.
Wow, 15 minutes. I wish I was that efficient.
I'm jealous as well. It takes a lot longer, even using the template style. And
I've
I like
only-
what you said,
I only
Christine.
started opening up the old letters. That's a new thing I'm doing. And that's mainly for undergraduates 199s. It's kind of like, because there's a little bit more mechanical aspect, but if I'm writing for somebody or for a faculty position, then I really seriously kind of dissect and evaluate their accomplishments and what they brought to the table in that work.
So my version of that, again, is in a clinical department. We have medical students that are applying for residency in ophthalmology, and then conversely, more commonly residents that in our program that are applying for fellowships, which can be one in any one of 6 different subspecialties, because that's the list of choices for ophthalmology fellowships. And I had the same, very similar structure, Christine, as yours. But I realized I began to feel that my letters, despite personalizing them, were too formulaic. And then I got worried that, well, I just recommended a different person to this program a year ago, and now are they going to compare the letters, and is it going to sound like the same person? So I've added in the last few years another twist, which has been interesting. I've asked the resident who is asking me to write a letter about them for fellowship to please write a letter as if they were going to recommend themselves, which I said, I know it's embarrassing. My letter will be totally different, but I'd like to see what you have to say about yourself, because I'm going to abstract a lot of information from that I might not have gleaned otherwise. And with doing that over the last 5 years, I feel like my letters are so much fresher and each one feels still genuine. It's not formulaic, and I'm liking these newer version over the last few years of a more personalized letter. But ironically, the personalization is by sort of taking comments or learning things from the letter that the candidate writes for themselves about themselves. Is never a very good letter in my mind. They're always, in fact, I usually have to extol their virtues much more than they would, because it's too embarrassing. But it gives me a sense of them that I had not appreciated. So I've liked that new format. But it's mostly a version of what you're doing, Christine, now with an added twist.
Mm-hmm.
So I've used both of those techniques, and I still do. Interestingly, more recently, I've also asked applicants that reach out to me to write a preliminary letter, mainly so that they can highlight some of the accomplishments they've done. It does save a little bit of time with me combing through their CV in terms of just looking up, how many papers they've published and such. They know that better than I do. And then that allows me to then, to Dr. Kuppermann's note, where they're too embarrassed necessarily to extol their own virtues, but really to delve into more personalized aspects of their character, how they work well with others, perhaps their surgical skills if it's a position that requires that knowledge. And so I found that to be very helpful and actually save time on my end, really combing through some of their academic accomplishments, because they know that better than I do, and they can really get that placed into that personalized letter. Just on another note, what was very interesting, a few years ago, there was a study that came out of UCLA looking at letters of recommendation written for men versus those written for women. Mm-hmm. And they found that there was a statistically significant difference in choice of certain adjectives that are used for men versus women. And I've been, since I looked that up for a talk I was giving, and I've been a little bit more conscious as to what I'm extolling, and to look at perhaps some biases that I might not have even been aware of possibly, and to make sure that those kinds of biases don't make their way into my letters.
Yeah, that I remember on a search committee here, we had a presentation for, I don't know, they keep doing new titles, but an equity advisor, I think, and they were talking about how letters for women tend to say she's a very nice person, she gets along with others, she's blah, blah. And then for the guy, it's all his accomplishments. So I've become very sensitive when I'm writing letters for women. I use very few female pronouns. I don't say she, I say they, and they didn't ask me to do that, but I write it that way. And I'm not inclined to talk about how they're such a lovely person and gracious with all her colleagues. So avoid that and really overtly avoid that.
I think that's thoughtful. I try to extol everybody. I try to extol all the virtues identically. To me, it's not even in my brain, but I have to admit that I've not thought about the use of pronouns, and I think I will probably revert to something more formal, not either use a pronoun or a first name, but just refer to them as Dr. So-and-so throughout the letter. The trouble with that, though, is it feels a little impersonal if I don't use their first name, but their first name tends to be a gender identifier.
Yeah, and I tend to formalize a little bit more, and I'll go with Mr. something and Doctor, but and occasionally a first person name. By the way, that is the thing I notice when I've asked people to, or they send me a little draft of a letter, theirs is actually very casual. It's all first name, and I take it up, but I bring it to a more professional kind of tier.
Well,
So
I
I
do
would
tend to
say-
intersperse doctor with the first name, but I think I'm learning something here. I think I'm going to formalize things a bit more to make sure there is no gender bias in that. And again, the advantage is all the ones that I mostly write for already are residents applying for their next jobs or fellowships. So they're all doctors, and doctors is gender ambiguous. So I like that in a term.
Or you can use the pronoun they. It works. It usually works quite well.
It usually can work.
Yeah.
And also when depending on the level that you're writing for somebody, commenting, I think particularly faculty position, is commenting on sort of demonstrated leadership, even within the research domain or in other domains. It's nice to comment on that if you can.
So Chris had kind of mentioned this template idea, and then Dr. Farid mentioned asking the candidate, actually several people mentioned asking the candidate to draft a letter. And I would just share that my wife and I actually recently, because we're getting so many requests for undergrads applying to med school or applying to grad school, that we just get inundated. And so we've actually put together a form where we ask them to fill out this information in advance and send it to us. And it includes, what's your motivation for applying for this given opportunity, and what are 3 things you're most proud of in the laboratory, and why. Write a short paragraph about your time in lab, when you joined, what motivated you to do so, what things your mentor helped you, and in what way. So we just have more background information to make those letters be more personalized. Now,
by the way, Brian, that raised another good point. Typically, I ask for 3 things. Again, most of my letters in this category are residents applying for fellowship, but I ask them to send me their CV, a draft letter, and also all those applications for fellowship tend to need a personal statement. I ask them to send me the personal statement as well.
Right.
I learn a lot from that.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And then we should add, I asked them if in this form that they fill out, we asked them, were there any challenges you had to overcome? And just, any descriptions of a diversity or equity challenge that happened to you that you want us to know about. So if they don't have anything to say, that's fine. There's nothing to add. But if they do, maybe it's something we can address in that letter. We also ask them to give 3 adjectives they'd use to describe themselves and explain why they picked those adjectives. So just a little bit more to flesh out that letter. Now that's for an undergrad or applying to medical school or graduate school. What about turning it back to the panelists? What about, do you feel is important for a letter when you're writing a letter for faculty as opposed to a resident or an undergraduate?
Well, that's probably going to be different.
Indeed.
in our different areas. So mine is basic research, and I talk about the research. So I know also I'm on the other side of it as a chair. I am involved with looking at candidates and hiring people. So I comment on whether they have what are sort of major accomplishments, but like whether they've identified a research theme, whether they have sort of done professional development, constructing towards the goal of in my case, basic science research career, and also in what ways have they been a leader within the community that they're currently working in, sort of already anticipating what's going to be they're going to be called upon to do as a faculty member. So it's like their preparedness for moving into that role. And I wouldn't say that for an undergraduate. Yeah.
So again, it depends again which type of chair letter. There's the merits and promotions within UCI. Again, for our own faculty, again, as chair, I tend to step back. We have a committee that writes those letters.
Yeah, totally.
And of course, we also have a usually ask for a personal statement from each one, and we have a voting process. But that committee involves Dr. Farid on the clinical faculty, together with Dr. Patel, who's our vice chair of academic affairs, with Dr. Kefaloff, who is our vice chair of vice chair of basic research. So it all depends, because our department has a lot of clinicians, but a lot of basic scientists as well. So that's for the merits and promotions. So we have a committee that's involved with writing that. Again, typically Marjan's changed her position as vice chair of clinical faculty development. So now it's Sameh Mossad who's taken that on. But so Marjan in the past, now Sameh more recently, would work with Vivek Patel on that letter. And conversely, Vladimir for the clinicians, and Vladimir would work on the letter with Vivek Patel for the basic scientists and get the personal statements. They run those by me, and so I vet them a bit. But I think by definition, I think Dr. Patel is the one that signs those letters. I think they're asking the chairs not to sign those, but we make sure that they're a quality letter. That's again all for the internal merits and promotions. Again, when I'm asked, as I am currently, to support the promotion of somebody, for example, in this case at Duke, for a full professorship, then that's like, again, these are frequently people that are not very well known to me, and that's a lot of work. That's still the biggest challenge. I have to study them. I read their papers. I look at their CV. I write something thoughtful and coherent, but I make it clear that I'm, what the basis of the interaction and relationship is, which is distant by definition. They're supposed to be non-conflicted letters. But those are challenging letters to write, because I'm trying to formulate something with a very impersonal data set.
Yeah, that's also where it's very important for you to identify. It's actually much, in a weird way, a more valuable letter if you're a person that's in the field that hasn't worked with them, hasn't been at the same institution, and you're just going on the basis of their work. So you can make that very clear in the lead-in to the letter. But you're right, it's a lot of work.
Correct.
You both talked about letters for merits and promotions. What about letters if you're nominating a faculty member for an award, either within UCI, at your national society, or some organization that you want them to be recognized at? Do you use the same approach, a different approach?
Well, it's again speaking to your audience. So it's oddly enough not terribly different in the first paragraph, other than in a sense, I would be inclined to make it very clear that I'm a senior person in that field. So, and then I've been following the research for 30 years, and that, it's sort of like, I want them to take me seriously so they could take my opinion seriously. And then it depends on the person you're writing about, but presumably if it's up for an award, you can really see the accomplishments, the singular contributions, the impact the person has had on their field. So you're really speaking to the kind of the criteria, the goals of that award, the kind of things that they're looking for. So you're not gonna say they finished their degree in 3 years, you're talking about something else. But I still have this, weirdly enough, the same, who am I, what were we writing for, who are they, how do I know them? And then you've got the guts that speaks to their accomplishments or their accomplishments relative to the award, or at least that's my opinion.
Dr. Gall makes a really great point, though, of knowing what is the award they're being nominated for, and so speaking to the criteria of that award. So I'm rephrasing that or repeating it in case there's folks watching this video later who are thinking of asking someone for a recommendation letter or award letter. Is your job is to pass on to the people writing your letters, what am I applying for? What is that foundation or that university committee looking for? And here's how I tick those boxes, so you make it easier for your letter writers to.
Well, that's true, but a lot of times people aren't applying things. So like I'm on the awards committee in the School of Medicine, and we're really looking at our faculty and trying to look at people that are outstanding in different areas, and we're not helping them apply for an award. So
There's a variant on that same theme, which are sort of foundation grants and awards. For example, Research to Prevent Blindness has these very distinguished awards that are to the person. They're worth a few $100,000, but it also is supposed to summarize their research, et cetera. And actually, there's the advancement office has a foundation grant writing person, Marge Brannon, who's amazing, and she helps us with those with writing those letters. She interviews the people. She's a phenomenal letter writer, and I get it. So the candidate gets involved. Marge is doing the heavy lifting, and then I get engaged. I review it. I edit as well. But there's a process for, especially if it's a foundation grant, which is kind of like an award. It's not a normal grant application. So again, there's resources in the university that I encourage you to look for.
To switch gears, how long does it take you all to write a good letter? I know Dr. Gall
Well,
mentioned
we heard from Dr. Gall a minute and a half.
No. I said it doesn't take 15 minutes. I would say, but it depends on who it is. With an undergraduate, actually, I can take a fair amount of time depending on who it is. And even I have some really outstanding undergraduates that have done me a lot of service, and I'm going to pay them back with a very good letter. So for those letters, okay, now I don't even know what I was supposed to say, about an hour. And but for the kind that if I'm evaluating somebody, as I recently did, somebody coming up at Stanford, coming up for tenure, that for sure is going to be a half a day going into the evening. And I usually have not agreed unless I kind of know their area well enough to write on it. If it was an award, a major award, kind of a distinguished award, that's the sort of thing I would draft, I'd return to, and I'd go back to it the next day. I'm not doing that at one sitting. Yeah.
Agreed.
So yeah.
I think it really depends on the type of letter that's being written. So I think time-wise, it's so variable, because as a letter reader on the other side, I don't necessarily want to be reading super long 2-3 page letters for every applicant when I'm reviewing 60 applicants. In those cases, I like them to be succinct, and so I always put myself in the other person's shoes, and looking at what's in front of them. If they're reading maybe 3 or 4 applications for a faculty position, that's different. Then I definitely want those letters will be longer, they'll be more detailed. If they're receiving, hundreds of residency applications, I really want to make those succinct, but at the same time, really powerful, potent in terms of the information I'm going to get across. I try to be very efficient with those nuggets of information, if you will. So to make it easier on the reader too, because I know when I'm reading a lot of letters, I kind of skim, I jump from paragraph to paragraph, get the highlights. Sometimes I'll bold, sentences that are important. This Resident, I would rank as the top 10% of residents I've ever trained, maybe, or something like that, where I really want that to be highlighted. So sometimes I'll bold things, and just for as a respect to my reader, who might be going through a bunch of these at once. So it may take me 15 minutes, it may take me an hour to write a letter. It really depends on the context.
Great points. Dr. Kuppermann, how long did it take you?
I would say, again, it's variable. I agree completely with everything that's said. This letter for supporting somebody in the outside for promotion to full professor, to tenure associate professor, I make sure that I know enough about the field, but that can take multiple hours. Those are very thoughtful. I mean, to make a commitment like that, that's a significant body of work. For our own trainees, to their letters for their various applications, it takes about, I would say, a typical number is about an hour of time. So
Yeah,
in
I
that
agree.
range.
And I agree with the comment about also depending on the audience, you don't want it to be too long. So if I'm writing for somebody going to graduate school, or I might go on to the second page. A lot of times I try not to. But it's different if it's a faculty person where they're really wanting you to evaluate. And I'll do that. If
And
it's
that
a
could take 2 or 3 pages, Chris?
What?
And that could take 2 or 3 pages if you're
That
evaluating.
definitely could take 2 pages. And when I'm looking at job, if as in this lofty chair position of mine, and I'm looking at people that are applying for faculty position, and if their main supervisor gave me a 2/3 of a page letter, I would think they maybe had a little issue with their relationship. And but so I really would expect them to give me more and give me more insight, and that goes on to the second page.
Right.
Agreed.
Now, Jeff Abbott asks, do you have any tips for making your letters stand out when you're trying to strongly endorse someone for a highly competitive position or award? What are your tips for having that person pop to the top?
I don't know, guys, what do you say?
I mean, I try to be as supportive and positive. I try not to repeat my adjectives too much, but try to use it as a source and say lots of good things and highlight the reasons why I'm thinking that way. But the ones that you believe that is a strong candidate for a competitive award, that's also a lot of work, because you want it to be meaningful and powerful in the hopes that they do achieve that award. So that's, again, I find those, while at a certain level they're easy because you believe in them, and it makes it easy for you to be supportive. You also realize how thoughtful you need to be. So those can be challenging letters too, for very competitive ones that you're really trying to help this person. I see the other question Jeff asked, which I won't go into yet, but that's almost more challenging. What if they're not that strong and you're being asked to write a letter? Then it's all the other adjectives I use that are, damn them with faint praise, basically. I want to say something nice about everybody, but it can be pretty mild and not very exuberant or enthusiastic.
Right.
So there's the dilemma then of, so somebody asked you to write a letter and they're not a very strong candidate. Do you defer and try to not write that letter, or do you tell them, I can write your letter, but I don't know you well enough? Or do you write them the letter and make it
Well, if they're one of our trainees, it's hard to say no, for example, to that. I mean, I would feel, especially as chair, or, Marjan, if, any of the faculty would feel, I think, guilty about a trainee applying for something. But I mean, we'd like to think our trainees are all fantastic, but some are less fantastic than others.
Yeah,
Well, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I've never had a situation where I felt I should turn someone down. I have heard that happen, and I've heard people tell me that they asked a faculty member and they said, well, they felt that they couldn't write a positive letter, and they might want to have someone else write the letter. But I haven't had to do that. But that's what they've told them. They said, I really don't feel I could be writing you a positive letter, and you might want to ask someone else.
Yeah, it's rare. I've had to do that. More on the scale of, we've had some medical students that come through and rotate with us and are with us for a short time. And in some of those cases, I have to be, I honestly said, like, they might rotate with me for 3 days and they want an amazing letter of recommendation. I've had to, in a couple of cases, say, I just don't think that I'd be able to write you letters. It's would be more valuable coming from somebody who knows you much better, who's had a longer, time to work with you. And yeah, I think honesty is the best policy in those cases, although it's hard and awkward.
Mhm.
Agree, Marjan, on that situation. I've also turned down medical students where there's limited interaction, but resident that's worked with us for several years, it's hard to say no, even when they've not been the greatest thing on earth. We try to be supportive to whatever degree we can, but
Yeah.
I try to make it clear in my letter that I don't want to. It's not that I value my credibility per se. It's that I want to be credible so that when I do have strong candidates, I am believed. If you see what I mean. So I don't want to
Absolutely.
sacrifice my credibility for somebody who's not as strong a candidate. So I write different sounding letters for those. But hopefully, the candidate, if they were to see it, most of them agree not to have access to the letter, but in case they did, they wouldn't necessarily be able to tell the difference between the lukewarm letter and the highly enthusiastic letter. Just similar structure as Christine laid out, but different adjectives.
Mhm.
Yeah, my mentor, actually, Roger Steiner, I asked him this question years ago about how does he write a letter about, for someone who might not be the strongest candidate. And, he said, basically, you highlight the things that they're good at. Maybe they're a very nice person, maybe they're very efficient, and you leave out the things that they're weak at. And oftentimes, if the reader is a careful reader, they will read between the lines, if you will, and pick up on the fact that you may have not mentioned how good they might be in clinic or how good they are in surgery. And that in and of itself is a way of communicating those facts as well.
I was speaking, just to comment on what was just said about you don't want to lose credibility. I've actually known of people that have lost credibility for that reason, because they always were famous for always writing a really positive letter. And even the students and postdocs knew that it was almost that then that was a problem because he was a really nice guy and very supportive, but it got so that everybody knew that was going to be a wonderful letter. And
We asked you how long it took you to write a letter. On average, how many letters a year do you write in an academic year? Have you ever kept track?
no.
No.
No, I haven't either.
Leads into the next question is, now with the different like AI tools or Chat GPT, are any of you utilizing those AI tools to help you write letters?
Not for me.
Not me either.
No, not yet, but my kids can do it. I just
That's a good
I
answer,
haven't
Marjan.
figured it
Not
all
yet.
out.
I suspect
Not
we
yet.
will before long.
No,
but
I
not yet.
noticed.
That's
I
right.
noticed. I wouldn't. I don't think it would save me much time. I really don't. Because, like I say, I do have kind of a formula, and I could spit that out about as fast as I could type. I guess that's it, Brian. I'm typing, so I'm really archaic. But
you don't dictate to your iPhone and transcribe it through.
on my iPhone, I just discovered I can do that. I didn't even know that I could do that. And so now I'm texting people really long messages. I thought people were thumbing it out on those long messages. But
no, they're
I did
dictating.
have somebody look up something for me recently, and I could see using the Chat GPT almost as an initial literature search, because you can ask it to write something with references and it helps you get started. I had an assistant do that for me. I don't know how to do it.
So I will just say I do use Chat GTP or GPT, whatever.
I don't know how to say it.
Yeah, but and for two things, I actually do use it to get me a fresh template for a letter. I don't actually, as Chris says, it would take just as long to write the letter, but I'm just using it as a nudge for a new way to start an intro or to close something. But then I I have to edit the whole thing from top to bottom anyway. And then I will point out I'm also writing a paper on a topic I won't discuss here that I'm not expert enough in. So I was using Chat GPT to help me. And I said, definitely, please put in references. And it made 3 great paragraphs, put in 6 references, and they were all full of crap. The paragraphs were great. The references were fake. And so when you go look them up, the DOI record indicator or PMI, they were real numbers and they were linked to nothing. So do not trust.
That's amazing.
Do not trust the large language models to figure any of this stuff out. You got to do your homework yourself. But it is a good template to get you started. I'll at least say that.
Yeah, maybe in the future for some things, or like if you are looking into a field needing to, it's outside your main area kind of thing.
Well, Brian, you said something that was appealing, the freshness. I will just to everybody here, as you're writing letters throughout your career, it's hard to keep them fresh. And that's why I like, so this, now the thought of including Chat GPT to make it fresher, maybe also, that's why I can have them now start writing their own letters. Again, the most common type of letter I write for trainees. So just always looking for ways to keep it fresh.
And we will point out, because we were recording this, I have it on audio. Dr. Abbott says, do not use AI or Chat GTP for School of Medicine merits and promotion letters. Not a good idea. It will be noticed, and I don't think the AI can handle it. So you're kind of.
Well, you pointed out something else, Brian, that was famous. There was that lawyer that, I don't know if he went to jail or whatever, but there was like that famous law case that he submitted. It was all written by ChatGPT, and all the references, all the citations were completely fallacious, and he had to pay either some exorbitant penalty or went to jail or lost his license or something. Now, those are old versions of ChatGPT. It's going to get better over time, so eventually it may become a tool that even Jeff Abbott would embrace. Just kidding.
I know
Jeff's shaking his head.
He's old school, but it's like if you're using a spell checker and autocorrect, and my computer does this all the time, and it autocorrects to the wrong word. I mean, it's still our job to say that word doesn't have the meaning that I meant, and you gotta ignore it.
Right.
So one other question, I mentioned it, but does anyone else have a form or a survey or request? What is it that you request of people when they ask you to write a letter? What do you want included with their materials so that you can write a good letter?
Well, I do like you. I haven't gotten so far as to make a form out of it. My brain doesn't tend to work that way, but I do ask them to highlight things in their background that I might not know. So I work with people in a research environment, so I wanted more background on their academic activities. And as I tell them, I want to be able to include accomplishments or activities that I might not know about. So I will tell them to send me an email, or it's a good idea to say if they have a personal statement. The problem with those is a lot of times they're just so theatrically something that I don't need to know about their grandmother, so I can just skip that. But I do ask them for information. But your form sounds good.
So I do the same as I mentioned. I like if the application, for example, to a fellowship program or residency involves a personal statement, I like that. And I also like to meet with them. I try to set up a half-hour meeting or so, not a super long one, not a short one, in the 15 to 30-minute range. I usually block it for 30 minutes, and we use less if needed. But just to get a better sense of their career arc, have a personalized one-on-one conversation of what they really want to do and why, so that'll help sort of nuance the letter. And I also like the reference. I've spoken directly with the candidate about their interest, and I believe it's genuine that they really do want to be a oculoplastic and orbital surgeon. God knows why anybody want to do that. No, just kidding. But just to personalize that.
Excellent. Marjan, anything to add? You were unmuting for a moment.
Oh yeah, no, I agree with everything that's been said. I usually ask for a CV, certainly. And depending on how well I know the candidate, You know, sometimes I'll meet with them separately. If I've known them, for example, my fellows are with me for a whole year. We work very, very closely. When I'm ready to, you know, write them a letter of recommendation for a job, I already feel like I know them very well and feel comfortable. So I don't need a whole lot of additional information from them. But, you know, if it's somebody who maybe I don't work as closely with, I think having a short meeting with them is very helpful, because at least it helps you align, you know, their goals and what they're looking for with what you want to put in the letter. So I agree with everything that's been said.
Yeah, and I agree, you should ask for a CV, and people expect that. So if you get a request for a letter, just ask them right then. Also ask them to remind you a little bit ahead of time when the due date is coming up, because that sometimes you can get lost in the weeds, and so they need to tell me a week before the deadline to make sure that it's done.
That was my next question for the group. Do you guys set limits or tell them I need at least 4 weeks to write your letter? Do you have a timeline in mind? Especially
I
because
don't.
a lot of letters for trainees or
Yeah.
students going, so you have a little bit, you have more runway time, I guess.
Yeah, I know, but my problem is generally the students, and including graduate students applying for postdocs, they'll ask me way in advance.
Mhm.
And it'll be like a month and a half, 2 months in advance, and I'm not going to write it right then, and I could completely forget about it. So they have to, I say, yes, I am going to do it. Write me and give me the heads up like 2 weeks in advance or something like that. So it just, again, it depends on who they are. I notice for when I get requests for letters from faculty, that if I have to write a letter for someone that's elsewhere, they usually give you a month, you know, or more.
I agree. Most people are pretty respectful of our time and ask in advance. If somebody's asking with a week's notice, that doesn't bode well for
No,
their
and
sense of
I would
planning.
be very willing to say I can't do it.
That's right.
If somebody gave me, it's just say it's not going to happen.
Right.
I have one final question, but we have, you know, a few minutes left. So if anyone in our audience has questions, please post it or raise your hand. A question I have is more, if you have a new faculty, do you, as you are all in leadership roles in your respective departments, do you teach your new faculty how to write letters, or do you give them examples of what you've written? Is there a process that you have?
Not at all.
That's a great question, and that's a great idea, because I don't think we've ever really had a formal you know, Zoom or anything like this that we're doing tonight that trains somebody on how to write a letter of recommendation. So noted. I think that's something we should do.
I agree with the caveat that in our department, for example, there's usually a progression that happens, that we have people that we ask them to sit on the residency application review committee. There's some crazy number, like 500 applications that come in every year. And so they're each assigned to review literally 100 applications, and they're going to read 300 letters of recommendation in those 100 applications. So there's this phase of some years of serving on those committees, and they get inundated. They get to visually, I mean, everybody's very smart, capable people to get to where they are. They sort of learn by reading through hundreds of other letters of application that have come in for the people applying to our positions.
Yeah, and I always, for the merit review things, we also have a committee, but I always make sure that I've got, if I have one of my new faculty members, they are co-writing with a more senior faculty member. So it's understood they're probably not going to generate many of the words, but they're being mentored through the first time. And I actually think it's a very good practice, because then they can look at the other letters and kind of make value judgments and appreciate this is not good. You know, like he says, they're smart people. They're picking up on it. I have given people examples of other kind of writing, even like for NIH grants, different sections of the grants. So I have had those kind of mentoring conversations with the more junior faculty. I just no one's ever asked about the letters.
I think that's it, unless you all had any last minute tips or last parting words you wanted to give our group.
No.
We can end a few minutes early. We really appreciate you all taking the time to explain your process, how you write the letters, and things that you look for in a good letter and how to navigate that process. Thank you to all who attended as well. And we will be back next month, and our topic next month will be merits and promotions for HS faculty. Myself and Dr. Mohammed Helmi will be talking about that. So thank you all, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thanks for
Good
inviting
night.
us.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.